Hello, and welcome to the start of Module 4, Linear and Nonlinear Functions. Our first lesson is going to be 4.1a, Graphing Linear Functions. Our objective today is that I can graph linear functions by making tables of values. So we have our first example here, letter A. Our equation is y equals 2x plus 5. We are going to fill in this table of values and use that to graph our line. So I always like to pick a couple values around the origin. So I'm going to go with -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. This will give us a nice, good representation of what's happening in this. So if I substitute in -2 times 2 is -4, plus 5 is 1. -1 times 2 is -2, plus 5 is 3. 0 times 2 is 0, plus 5 is 5. 1 times 2 is 2, plus 5 is 7. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 5 is 9. And now we're going to graph these points on our grid. So we have -2 and 1. We have -1 and 3. We have 0 and 5. We have 1 and 7. And we have 2 and 9. And now we're going to connect these with a line. Your line is expected to be a straight edge. So if you're doing it on paper, use a straight edge or ruler. If you are doing it digitally, use the line tool that's built into Formative. It is expected that your line is all the way to the edge of the grid because this does go to infinity in both directions. You also need to include the arrows at the end of your line. Without all of those components being present, you are not fully graphing this equation. So you need to have it all the way to the edge of the grid, and you need to have arrows at the ends. So let's look at letter B. Again, we're going to start with the same input values, the same domain, and we're going to figure out what we have. So -2 times -2 is a +4, minus 3 is 1. -1 times -2 is a +2, minus 3 is -1. 0 times -2 is 0, minus 3 is -3. 1 times -2 is -2, minus 3 is -5. And 2 times -2 is -4, minus 5 is -7. Sorry, minus 3 is -7. So now I'm going to graph these points. -2, 1, -1, -1, 0, -3, 1, -5, and 2, -7. And I can go ahead and connect those dots. And we have our line. And again, I'm putting in the arrows at the two ends. All right, letter C. Y is equal to 3x minus 7. So I'm going to start with my same values, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. -2 times 3 is -6, minus 7 is -13. -1 times 3 is -3, minus 7 is -10. 0 times 3 is 0, minus 7 is -7. 3 times 1 is 3, minus 7 is -4. 2 times 3 is 6, minus 7 is -1. And since that first point I see is going to lie outside of my grid, I'm going to go one more point. I'm going to say 3. 3 times 3 is 9, minus 7 is 2. All right, so now we're going to graph these. Like I said, 2, -13, we're not going to be able to graph on this grid. It's just going to be off of it, but that's okay. -1, -10 is our first point that we can graph. 0, -7 is our next. 1, -4 is next. 2, -1, and then 3, 2. These are our values. And there we go. We have our line. And again, I'm drawing arrows at the end of it to indicate that it is going to infinity in both directions. Letter D, we have y equals -4x plus 6. I'm going to do the same thing. Start with my same values, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. -2 times -4 is +8, plus 6 is 14. -1 times -4 is +4, plus 6 is 10. 0 times -4 is 0, plus 6 is 6. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, plus 6 is 2, and negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, plus 6 is negative 6. Sorry, negative 2. 2 is negative 2. I'm looking at my next line, which was 3. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12, plus 6 is negative 6. All right, so now we're going to graph those. Again, I went to that extra point because I saw that first one, negative 2, 14, is not going to be on our grid. So at negative 1, we're at 10. At 0, we're at 6. At 1, we're at 2. At 2, we're at negative 2. And at 3, we're at negative 6. And so I can draw my line in. I'm going to straighten that up a little bit. And there we go. We have our curve, or our line, and we are ready. So I would like you to go on to the next page and do the 2 U-try problems at the top. All right, starting with letter E, we have y equals 3x minus 4. So I'm going to use my same values, and I'm going to multiply. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, minus 4 is negative 10. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, minus 4 is negative 7. 0 times 3 is 0, minus 4 is negative 4. 1 times 3 is 3, minus 4 is negative 1. 2 times 3 is 6, minus 4 is negative 2. And now I'm going to go ahead and graph those. So I have negative 2, negative 10, negative 1, negative 7, 0, negative 4, 1, negative 1, and 2, negative 2. 2, positive 2. 2, positive 2. Because 2 times 3 is 6. 6 minus 4 is positive 2. All right. We'll draw on our line. And we have our arrows at the end of it. Okay. Letter F, we have negative x minus 7. So my x values, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. My y values are going to be negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, negative 8, and negative 9. And I'm going to go ahead and graph those points. So I'm at negative 2, negative 5, negative 1, negative 6, 0, negative 7, 1, negative 8, and 2, negative 9. And so I go ahead and I graph that line, and we're going to add the arrows onto the end of it. Now, our next one says choose appropriate domain values. What does this mean? Well, as I look at this, our equation is y equals 1/4 x plus 3. And if I used my standard array of numbers, I would have, we would have a point at 2.5. We'd be at 2.5. We'd be at 2.75. We'd be at 3. We'd be at 3.25 and 3.5. Now, do those seem like really easy points for us to graph? No. So we're not going to do the standard negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2. Instead, we're going to look at our slope, our fraction. And I'm going to look for fractions that are multiples of 4 that will make my fraction go away. So my first one will be negative 8, negative 4, 0, 4, and 8. Why am I picking these? I'm picking these because they are multiples of 4 that will get my fraction to be gone. All right, so negative 8 times 1/4 is going to be negative 2 plus 3 is 1. Negative 4 times 1/4 is 1. Negative 1 plus 3 is 2. 0 times 1/4 is 0 plus 3 is 3. 4 times 1/4 is 1 plus 3 is 4. 8 times 1/4 is 2 plus 3 is 5. And now I can graph these points. So we are at negative 8 and positive 1. We're at negative 4 and positive 2. 0 and 3. 4 and 4, and then 8 and 5. So we see it's a much shallower slope for this one because we're multiplying by a fraction each time. And if we zoom in on it and we zoom in on our normal area of -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, you can see that, this is kind of, we're hitting those points that we thought we were going to hit. Quarter, we got half, right? So we're working our way in between, but you can see how it would be difficult to graph this as a point, right? These points would be a little tough for us to put onto our grid, but by going to the whole numbers, we're snapping to the grid lines. All right, so let's look at letter B. Letter B, we have -3/5 x minus 3. So I'm going to use multiples of 5 in order to make my work easier. So I have -10, we have -5, 0, 5, and 10. And when I substitute in -10 times -3/5 minus 3 is going to give me 3. We're going to get 0 when we multiply by -5, because that'll be -3, or that'll be 3 minus 3, which will be 0. 0 will give us -3. 5 times -3/5 is going to be -3 minus 3, which will be -6. 10 times -3/5 minus 3 is going to give us -9. All right, so now we graph these points. We have -10, +3. We have -5, 0. We have 0, -3. We have 5, -6. And we have 10, -9. And if we draw in our line, we're right there. All right. So we're going to go on to the next page now. Example 3. We have y equals -1/3 x plus 6. So we're talking about 1/3. So I'm going to use multiples of 3. So we have -6, -3, 0, 3, and 6. And when we substitute in -6 times -1/3, that's going to give us a +2, plus 6 is 8. -3 times -1/3 is going to give us a +1, plus 6 is 7. 0 times -1/3 plus 6 is 6. 3 times -1/3, that's -1 plus 6 is 5. And 6 times -1/3 is -2, plus 6 is 4. And now we're going to go ahead and graph these. So we're at -6, +8. -3, +7. 0 and 6. 3 and 5. And 6 and 4. And we can go ahead and draw in the line for that one. I'm a little off, so I'll just nudge it over. All right, arrows to the end, and we're good. Letter D, we're going to go ahead and we have y equals 3/4 x minus 2. So we're multiples of 4 are what we're going to work with. So -8, -4, 0, 4, and 8. When we substitute it in, -8 times 3 divided by 4 minus 2 is going to give me -8. -4 times 3/4 will give us a -3, minus 2 is -5. 0 times 3/4 is 0, minus 2 is -2. 4 times 3/4, that's a +3, minus 2 is 1. And 8 times 3/4 minus 2 is going to give us 4. So now we're going to graph it. -8 and -8. We're going to be at -4, -5, 0, -2, 4, and 1, and 8 and 4. And now we draw in our line with our arrows at the end, and it's all the way to the edge of the grid. Now, there are 4 you try problems for you in this section. I would like you to do those now, and then check your work against mine. All right, letter E, we're going to fill in. We have our inputs, -4, -2, 0, 2, and 4, since we are dealing with multiplying by 1/2. And when I substitute in, we're going to get the following values: -4, -3, -2, -1, and 0. So my points: -4, -4, -2, -3, 0, -2, 2, -1, and 4 and 0. So we're able to draw in our line there. And we have that. All right. Letter F. We are multiplying by -2/3 times x plus 3. So I'm going to multiply with multiples of 3. So I have -6, -3, 0, 3, and 6. And I start with, we get a 7, we get 5, we get 3, 1, and -1. And let's graph these: -6 and +7, -3 and +5, 0 and 3, 3 and 1, and 6 and -1. I'm able to draw in my line. Okay, and the arrows at the end. Letter G. We're multiplying by 5/3. 5/3 times x minus 5. So my multiples are all going to be multiples of 3. So -6, -3, 0, 3, and 6. All right, and when I substitute in, I get -15, I get -10, I get -5, 0, 5. We're going to add one more, and we're going to do 9, and that's going to give us a value of 10. So now I start graphing. -6 and -15 I can't graph, but -3, -10 I can. 0, -5, 3, 0, 6, 5, and 9, 10. And we draw our line, and we have our arrows. Okay, letter H. We have -3/2 x plus 6. Our multiples are going to be of 2, so -4, -2, 0, 2, and 4. And when I find my y values, I get 12, 9, 6, 3, and 0. We're going to add in one more. We're going to do 6, and that is at -3 then. All right. So we have -4 and +12 off the grid, -2 and +9, 0 and 6, 2 and 3, 4 and 0, and 6 and -3. And again, we draw in our line, and we have our graph. All right, that is going to be the end of 4.1a. We will pick up again tomorrow with the rest of Module 4.1. Otherwise, if you have questions, please bring them to class, and have a great day.